of the match against Wesley. So after 3 games, Magnus Carlsen, he is down by 1 point against Teimour Radjabov. We're going to jump into that game that just started, game 4.
Yeah, and Magnus playing a really provocative opening, the modern defence. Black there, not fighting for the centre at this early stage, allowing white to just put up this wall of pawns in the middle of the board. And traditionally, very risky strategy, but it's because Magnus needs to win with black. When you need to win with black, you need to take risks. You need to get your opponent out of their comfort zone as early as possible.
And Radjabov actually choosing a very solid line against Magnus's opening. You know, Magnus pushed a pawn there on the left, and Radjabov says, hey, you want to expand with your pawns? No, absolutely not. And now Magnus developing a knight.
Yep, so at some point soon, over the next few moves, Magnus will start the fight back in the centre of the board. He's allowed white all the space, and you need to counter that space at some point. White's centre will come under serious pressure.
Smile on Magnus's face. I'm just going to keep everyone up to date on the situation. So Magnus has to win this game to take it to tiebreak. Any other result, and Radjabov will be the winner. Artemiev has to win that game to take it to tiebreak. And in the third one, which is that one, Vachier-Lagrave, Hikaru Nakamura, then Hikaru has to win game 4 to take that one to tiebreaks. And back to the game.
Yes, back to the game. Not too many developments, except for Radjabov developing his bishop into the centre. So just planting that bishop on a nice, safe square, guarding those pawns in the middle. And Magnus has to decide now, does he push a pawn in the centre of the board? Does he maybe use one of his knights to kick that bishop that has just moved away? Does he develop his light-squared bishop? A huge amount of choice for the world champion. All of them perfectly viable, but in this must-win situation, he needs to weigh them up, weigh up the risk, and just pick the choice that he thinks will make Radjabov most uncomfortable. That will be the story of this next few moves and the later middle game.
Yes, and I can tell you actually that Radjabov has played this exact position before. He played against Nepomniachtchi in the FTX Crypto Cup, the knockout. And okay, there in that particular game, Nepomniachtchi decided to develop the light-squared bishop and try and exchange it for the knight. Here, Magnus has gone for a much more unusual approach. He has picked up his pawn to develop the light-squared bishop onto the longest diagonal on the board.
Yep, so a bit of a hybrid here between the modern defence and potentially the hippo defence, the hippopotamus defence.
Your favourite.
One of my favourites. It's not quite that opening, but it's just borrowing some ideas. So Black's bishop, as Jovanka mentions, will come out there by the square that has been created by this pawn push. And once that happens, Black will be super flexible. He'll have a lot of choices with which pawn to push. And, OK, Radjabov doesn't want to allow Black the time to slowly bring his pieces out. He counters in the centre. He strikes now, attacking the Black Knight, kicking it away from one of its ideal posts. And the question for Magnus is, do you step into the centre of that board with the Knight, allowing a trade, or do you step back? Magnus famously loves to step back in these types of positions with his knight. He's provoked White's pawns forward, and now he'll try and chip away at those White's pawns. He'll try and erode them with his own pawns.
Do you feel that Magnus is taking liberties?
He's a world champion. He's won the tour. He can afford to take liberties, Jovanka.
Yeah, I know. He just kind of undeveloped his knight. His bishop is still on the starting square. White has got the dream set up in terms of the fact that the white pawn is in the middle of the board. The knight is there to back it up. It somehow feels that Magnus has gone a little bit too far, and that Radjabov should be able to kind of get a very pleasant advantage. Having said that...
Possibly. It's still early, though.
Yeah.
And despite what the evaluation bar says, despite conventional wisdom saying that Black has lost a lot of time, Black has not been too ambitious, Magnus, he needs to take risks. As mentioned, it's a must-win scenario for him. A loss is the same as a draw. And actually, I've seen him play this over the board in classical chess. Basically the same idea, except without this last pawn push and the bishop developing. He's brought his knight out several times and then retreated to his start square. That's a well-known idea that he's utilised in many scenarios, many branches of this opening. So, yes, you lose a lot of time, but you do provoke the opponent. You lull them into a false sense of security. You try and just confuse them with your odd manoeuvres, your time-losing manoeuvres, And maybe they'll get flustered. Maybe they'll lash out. They'll try and strike too soon. Maybe they'll just sit and wait too long. Either way, Magnus definitely making Radjabov think. And for sure, Radjabov will never have studied this position before. So, OK, Magnus also, with this last bishop development move, has got ready now to push the black c-pawn forward to challenge the white centre.
The move that I'm drawn to doing in this particular position is just simply to step the queen up one square forward, and the idea being to actually trade off dark-squared bishops.
OK, so quite a thematic idea. This is black's best defender, potentially quite a strong piece as well on this diagonal. Lots of targets for that. So maybe stepping forward with the white queen and then later on trading off this bishop and utilising the white queen to support this bishop trade. But, Jovanka, what happens if black strikes now in the centre and counters against this strong spearhead of white's structure?
Yeah, that is a question, and I guess I would capture it. But, OK, we do have a move on the board.
So white has connected 4. He's won this variant of chess with the pawn structures. But meanwhile, Magnus will chip away, as mentioned, at the head of this structure. He has to erode this pawn. Otherwise, he's just going to be too cramped. Black has no space to manoeuvre, so you have to break down this structure. And now, who connects 4? It's black this time with the connect 4.
The mean girls. Well, they're always in the middle of the board.
It's the different pawn structures, the different variants of chess. I think maybe that should be a variant all about the pawn structures.
I know, you know, a fusion of connect 4 and chess.
Well, maybe you could, maybe you could get like some extra time. The prettier like pawn structure you have.
Yeah, Magnus laughing as well, maybe just at the pawn structures. I expect him to play this move just so that if we... OK, he has played it. We do see connect 4 in action. And if there is a trade of all of these pieces, then at least now black has some room to manoeuvre. And at least black has maybe a semi-open line later in the game. He can later play for a pawn break on this side or in the centre. This one is a perfectly healthy position, I think. And, OK, this position... OK, we did see a trade of everything on this square. Radjabov really playing safety-first chess, not even trying to punish Magnus's opening, and maybe going for your idea, Jovanka, to try and trade bishops. I do expect Magnus to be very happy, though, with this development. I think black's queen can come to the side, black's knight can start to remanoeuvre around, and it's just balanced. It's completely level, but Magnus now much happier than he was just a few moves ago.
There is one kind of issue, though, for Magnus, and it's more of a practical issue rather than the actual quality of his play. But is the position a little bit too simple for white? I mean, white's plans are kind of quite easy, you know, trade off the dark-squared bishop, occupy the lines in the centre, perhaps come in with a knight into the centre and then wait.
Possibly, although I've played these positions with both sides and they're full of life, they're super rich. Yeah. Black has so many pawn breaks, this one. White has to keep full control. And look at what black's last move. This is really instructive. This is one to put in the memory banks for everyone at home. If you see in this position your opponent's queen and bishop line up together, you know that white for sure wants to, for example, if black just waits, white wants to trade off this beautiful bishop, supporting the black king, protecting the black king. And here, black's bishop cannot move. It cannot run away from this trade, because if it steps back, the black rook would be captured. Black's rook would fall prey to a bishop. And that is why Magnus, he spotted this idea a couple of moves in advance, and he's just simply moved his rook. So now if white's bishop does try and trade off the black bishop can say no thanks and just step back. And yes, white has a nice formation here with the queen and bishop, but black's bishop long-term is on the better diagonal. And if things do open up, then it will become a fearsome piece. Magnus just trying to keep pieces on the board. And yeah, I think that will be slightly annoying for Teimour Radjabov in the current position. Instead of going for that bishop trade, which would have been rejected anyway, he just centralises his rook. And yeah, you mentioned, Jovanka, white has quite simple plans, but still lots of pieces on the board.
Yeah. And that's the main thing, actually, that there's a lot of tension and pawn breaks on the board. So this is good news for Magnus, that there's a lot of options available. And the knight now, well, it takes a step backwards in order to go forward. So the knight has plans of arriving either on the c5 square or the e5 square. But OK, you go backwards, I go forwards, and so I'm looking for a forward move. Yeah, is there one on the board?
Maybe white's bishop, if it really wants to insist on a trade for black's dark squared bishop, can offer that trade now. There we go. Radjabov plays it. He knew that he would have been rejected. The trade would have been rejected if he'd gone from another angle. So now that the black knight has moved out of the way, he offers the trade. But look at this last move from Magnus Carlsen, putting the black bishop on an ugly square. But it has prevented any trades. It's a heavy cost, though, to keep the bishops on the board. Look at that bishop. Now, look at the two white bishops in return. It contrasts those bishops against black's bishops. And, OK, Magnus blocks up the diagonal of the white bishop, the white light squared bishop, towards the black king. I think he's just trying to go for a formation. We talked about the hippopotamus defence. Now it's going to be the hedgehog pawn structure.
Oh, wow.
Where, yeah, it's really prickly. If you look at all of black's pawns on the 6th rank, on the 6th row, they're just sitting there waiting. If the white pieces go too close to those pawns, they'll get pricked and they'll get attacked, and you will regret it. So definitely you've got to be careful in this type of formation. And there we see on Magnus's screen just the highlighted squares of the last move. He's just waiting to react to see what Radjabov does. There's no obvious move for Radjabov. I think that's another benefit. That's another good thing to do in a must-win situation. Just give your opponent a lot of choice, but don't give them one choice that's easier than the others. Just give them 4 or 5 decent moves, but let them weigh it up, let them overthink, let them go too deep into the position. And
So you do see winning chances for Magnus in this game?
all 3 results still definitely possible.
And the bar is slightly over to Hikaru Nakamura's side. He is in a must-win situation as well in Game 4 against Radjabov. But 3 players in must-win situations in this round of games. So maybe the first day without tie-breaks, but probably we will have them.
Yeah.
Looks good for Nakamura right now anyways.
Exactly. We've had tie breaks on every single day, so I don't think today will be any different.
No.
I think someone will make a comeback.
Yeah, and OK, talking of comebacks, that white bishop has come back all the way to its starting square. The white's light square bishop stepping back, having not made any inroads into the black position. And the other white bishop steps back where it came from, trying to find a different avenue of attack. OK, Radjabov, with his last 2 moves, has signalled the retreat. I think Magnus will be very happy to see that. The position is still roughly balanced, but the longer this kind of cat and mouse game goes on, where white is stepping back, black is slowly improving, the happier the world champion will be.
And should black be worried about the trade of dark square bishops? Because I can see that Radjabov might step all the way to the right and challenge that bishop.
Yeah, I think Magnus will avoid it. I think there won't necessarily be any forced trades. First, Radjabov, though, he switches his attention to the left side of the board. And he's pushing a pawn forward, a massive, massive threat in the position. White's pawn, that has just pushed, wants to push 1 square further, and that would trap black's light-squared bishop. That black light-squared bishop needs an escape route. It has nowhere to run back to yet. The black queen or knight are likely to move in order to create somewhere for that black light-squared bishop to run to. OK, Magnus, he's about to drag his hand. He's moving forward. He's about to push a pawn, I think. OK, will he change his mind? It looks like he just moved the mouse slightly forward. Maybe he can push a pawn to block the advance of this white pawn that's highlighted in yellow there, that has just moved. OK, will he change his mind? That's what we've seen from the world champion throughout this event here at the finals. He often highlights the squares of his first instinct, of his first, the move of his first instinct, and then he pauses for 30 seconds. And often he changes his mind, but he does indeed go for that pawn push.
Yes, and he's done it. I would just capture that pawn, open up some lines. And I tell you one move that really appeals to me. Okay. It's to push the H-pawn 2 squares forward, you know.
You've been watching these top guys for so long now, Jovanka, that you're accustomed to that idea.
Yeah, you know, just try to soften up the black king. And the reason I'm suggesting this move is also because the black queen has gone on an adventure. She's completely stranded on the left side of the board. She can't get to the king side too early, too easily. Yep,
that would be very, very logical, to be honest. As soon as you said it, I thought, why didn't I think of that first? Yeah, so I think at some point we might well see white's H-pawn step 2 squares forward. I don't see any downside necessarily, and it would pose some questions to Magnus. OK, first, there have been a trade of pawns, and there is one fully open line in the position that both of these 2 rooks on the left side are staring at each other down this A-line. And that's going to cause some real issues for one side. It's not clear who that open line will benefit yet. evaluation bar thinks white, but I'm not 100% sure. You could see a scenario where black is the one who uses that A-line to enter into white's half later in the game.
And is black threatening to burst open in the centre and push a pawn, push the D pawn?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. And if black does push his D pawn forward, he would release the energy of his dark squared bishop. Black's dark squared bishop is stuck at home right now. And, OK, Magnus just reacting here. It's interesting that he kind of puts his mouse to the side as well. I always have my mouse kind of straight on, but different techniques, different people.
It's like with the knights on the actual chessboard. Sometimes someone keeps them inwards, someone wants them pointing forwards.
Actually, Kaja, you're right. Magnus always points his knights inwards, and he does the same with his mouse. It's really interesting. I always point my knights forwards, and I do the same with my mouse. So.
It must be a connection.
Yeah, interesting.
How about you, Jovanka?
I point my knights forwards and my mouse is wherever it is.
Say forwards, because then our theory holds.
OK, it will be forwards.
That's a large sample pool, right? 3 people, but it must be true. OK, meanwhile, Radjabov has stepped back with his dark squared bishop. That last move, to me, by Radjabov just hints at the fact he's indecisive. He's unsure what he wants to do next, and therefore he wants to save time on the clock. The last thing you want against Magnus Carlsen is to be lower on time. Also, that bishop now is maybe out of the firing line if black were to push forward in the centre. And Jovanka, you mentioned that the white H-pawn might step forward. It's the black H-pawn that takes the first push.
Ooh.
OK.
That I didn't have on my radar. I never thought that kind of move was possible.
We know Magnus, though, he loves to push his corner pawns, his rook's pawns forward, just to gain space, just ahead of a potential endgame. This pawn structure for black, actually, on the right side, is perfect for an endgame because all the pawns protect each other, and you also stop white's pawns advancing. So Magnus just slightly shaking his head there, kind of bopping with the music.
I think yeah.
Yeah, not shaking it in a bad way, just kind of enjoying the tunes, just getting in the rhythm.
He must be happy inside as well, right, from winning the tour?
Yeah.
Yes. And take a look at Radjabov's last move. I also didn't see this one. The rook steps all the way up the board and attacks the pawn. Now there's a distinct threat in the position. White is threatening to play bishop takes pawn, actually. And that would net a pawn.
Yeah, possibly he wants to do that. And will that, therefore, force Magnus's hand, do you think? Will he take off this white rook?
Well, we have the answer.
OK.
It's off the board. OK. And...
now the pawn structure has changed. Both sides have isolated pawns. White's isolated pawn could be very, very strong, but it could be very, very weak on that A-line right now. Black is attacking that pawn with his rook. So... Wait
1 second, there's knight takes pawn.
OK.
Oh, my...
Magnus, has he blundered? He's shaking his head. The world champion, he's just forgotten that this pawn can be captured by a knight. If he takes this piece back, then we'll see white's rook slide across 2 squares and create a pin. The world champion, he's blundered a pawn, and he's not happy about it. He's distraught about this, despite the fact he's won the tour today. He's such a perfectionist. He wants to win every game. And what's he going to do? His body language shows that he's not really trying to fight on, sticking out his tongue there as well. OK, he has to just take that knight and bite the bullet, try and keep fighting. It's only a pawn, and white's position has weak pawns as well. OK, he pushes in the centre. Very logical as well, trying to break out with his bishops.
Yeah, but how to survive this?
The bar doesn't react too much to this situation. Like, it doesn't react as much as Magnus reacts.
No, but small margins at this level.
Yeah.
If you lose a pawn against someone as strong and as solid as Radjabov, you normally don't fight back. And there we see on Magnus's screen, he's pre-moved, he's expecting white's pawn to capture in the centre, then he will automatically recapture with his own bishop.
And one of the things I want to say is that the extra pawn that Radjabov has is actually a pass pawn, which is 3 squares away and from queening and can move 1 step forward and be under the eye of the light square bishop sitting next to the king. So that makes it a very strong pawn, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Magnus just asking questions of Radjabov. Radjabov very sharp, very quick to see that pawn capture, the win of the pawn. Magnus taking his hand off the mouse, meanwhile. Maybe we can show as well how and why that was such a big blunder while Magnus Carlsen thinks. while Teimour Radjabov thinks, because in this position, we do see that white is a pawn up, and this is where Magnus, he's just brought his rook to the side. Okay, we'll see some moves, but white took this pawn, and this is what Magnus has missed. It looks like black has covered this pawn twice, but if the black bishop had taken, then the white rook slides across, and because of this pin, this bishop is doomed. And this was what Magnus had not spotted. Instead, if we go back to the position, lots and lots of moves. After the pawn stepped forward, we saw the white knight step back, then... Wow, OK, let's go back to the players, because Magnus just resigns. OK, wow, so sudden. The world champion doesn't even fight on.
Wow, it's over. We did see a fist in the air from Teimour Radjabov winning his match against the world champion. Magnus Carlsen resigns, but he is losing this match, but he is the winner of the Meltwater Championship.